Far Cry 5 first released in early 2018 and is by far the most controversial game in the Far Cry series. It was different to say the least, and while it was still Far Cry at its core, it made some major changes in its game design and story, thus is the reason for all the controversy. I just finished replaying Far Cry 5 and today we are going to break down the game and decide if it's worth buying in 2020. Where to even begin with the story? Well, you play as a character who goes by the name Deputy, or whenever you're with your other deputy pals, you go by Rook. First of all, I am not a fan of the no-name, no-speech characters in Far Cry. Thank God Far Cry 6 is changing this, but anyways, I feel like the speechless, nameless characters make for a sort of boring story. The story to me seems lazily strung together, and neither the main character nor the supporting cast are interesting enough to make me feel connected with the game. This game has a lot of side characters, and I mean a lot, and truthfully I don't even have a favorite because they all feel so boring to me. Well, except maybe Nick Rye. He's probably one of the few characters I found interesting, mainly because of his plot with his wife Kim, but other than that, all the other characters feel kinda the same. Sure, some of them have standout or odd personalities, but in the end you just end up doing favors for every character and wondering why they can't just do it themselves. However, what semi-redeems this is the villains of Far Cry 5, the Seed family. Joseph Seed is the main antagonist, and while he certainly isn't the best villain in the series, I thought he was a decent villain, and what was a little bit more interesting about Joseph is that he sometimes made you feel like he was right. There were definitely some moments in the game where I'm like, wow, this guy might not be so messed up. I mean, what he wants to do and create is good at its core, it's just how he goes about doing it that comes off as evil. You know, the standard things like murder, kidnapping, all that. There is also what I would call the second tier villains, which would be Joseph's family. There is John, Jacob, and Faith Seed. They all had some super creepy characters, and for the most part I found them interesting. Faith in particular was interesting because she wasn't exactly evil. Without spoiling anything, Faith isn't just a typical villain. Jacob is kind of just the straight up evil brute force villain, while John is a little bit of both. Now obviously I'm not going to spoil the ending, but this is probably the most controversial part about this game, so I just wanted to say that I lean towards more the disappointed side when it comes to the ending. For me, it was just disappointing and pretty unsatisfying. I've gotten both endings on my separate playthroughs, and I truthfully didn't like either of them. And while we were talking about disappointment, I really didn't like the mission structure in Far Cry 5. It was the exact same thing every time. Enter a new region, do a few missions or outposts, then get kidnapped, escape, do another couple missions, get kidnapped again, and then escape again until you finally make it to the boss fight. And then you have to clear a bunker. Not only is this mission structure repetitive, but it also makes everything pretty predictable and boring. After the first region, I just wanted to rush through the next because it just felt like a grind of doing the same thing over and over again. Also, as someone who loves the outposts in Far Cry 5, I felt like there weren't very many. There were only like 20 outposts in total, which leaves like 4 to 5 to a region. But there is something called Outpost Master, in which you can replay all the outposts after you've completed all of them. And while I think it was a good system, I definitely think Far Cry New Dawn did it better, in which you could just scavenge it and redo them with increasing difficulty as you play, and play them as many times as you want. Gameplay in Far Cry has always been an enjoyable experience, and Far Cry 5 is no different. It's mostly the same as the rest of the series with a few new additions, and I've always enjoyed Far Cry's gameplay, so it was totally fine for me. I will say, however, that the handling of some guns are extremely simple, and most guns have like no recoil whatsoever. So by the end of the game, just running and gunning with my AR got a little boring. Oh, and just a tip, never use the flamethrower. You'll just end up burning yourself 90% of the time. Thankfully, there's some other weapons like the bow or a shovel launcher that can mix things up a bit, but I feel like the shooting was missing something to make it more unique and enjoyable. For example, in Far Cry New Dawn they introduced special abilities like a double jump and super punch that shook up the gameplay and made it more interesting. And there is nothing really like that in Far Cry 5. It all feels pretty standard Far Cry, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, I just think it could have used a little boost to become great. Let's talk about stealth for a minute, because stealth is always a very important part of these open world games for me, and I'm sure it is to many of you as well. I think stealth in Far Cry 5 is actually decent. One of the things I like about it is it's a lot more skill heavy compared to other games, and the stealth is fairly in depth. Melee weapons in particular I found to be very fun, and they allowed for some creative stealth kills, like launching your bat into an enemy's head from a distance, or jumping off a zip line and landing on your enemy for a sweet melee takedown. I wish there was more versatility in using a gun in stealth like there is for melee weapons, because just using a suppressed weapon is not only more likely to get you detected, but it's also just not as fun. Seeing a little bit more gadget variety for stealth would have been cool, as the only gadgets you can really use in stealth are the throwing knives and smoke bombs. Even the gadget variety for combat was a little lackluster because they all are just explosives that really just end up doing the same thing. There's also a pretty big roster of guns for hire or fangs for hire you can use in the game, and while most of them are the same, it doesn't hurt to have some backup to make your life a little easier every once in a while, especially when that backup is a 500 bear named Cheeseburger. Let's also talk about driving a little, since you will spend a decent amount of time driving or flying in this game. Driving in this game is okay. Driving in first person in general is pretty challenging, but the turning feels really janky and slow, especially on four-wheelers. Not a huge deal, since I don't think any of you are going to be buying this game for the driving, but I think the helicopters are much better anyway and are definitely the way to go for world traversal. Customization in this game is solid. I like the weapon customization, and although it's not incredibly in-depth, I'll take it over Far Cry New Dawn's any day. Character customization is a little on the smaller side, but you don't ever see your character anyway, so not a big deal there. Far Cry 5 once again uses the perk system, and it's meh. I wish the perks had a bigger impact on the gameplay, because truth be told, most of them are really just more ammo capacity or smaller things like faster swimming speed. I'd say overall though, Far Cry 5's gameplay is probably the game's strongest link, and while it's nowhere near perfect, it's enough to satisfy most of the time. I've always loved Far Cry's open worlds, and I have to be honest, Far Cry 5's world was honestly pretty disappointing to me. While Hope County, Montana does look pretty, it suffers from poor variety. I feel like most of the map looks the same, and there were only a few moments where I stumbled upon something cool or interesting. The map is mainly just open stretches of field or forest that are just filled with nothingness. This may be Montana's fault for just not being more interesting, but it's not done particularly well anyways. The world felt pretty dull, if I'm being honest. There weren't many civilians. I wish they increased the amount a bit so it didn't constantly feel like you were alone. And while being a lone wolf can be fun, there isn't enough life to make it feel lived in. The random events that take place are also not great. They're all pretty much the same and usually just have you shoot a single Peggy driver in his car where he will be either driving a delivery truck or prison transport. It wasn't very varied, and I wasn't really all too motivated to go out of my way just to complete them. The only other real thing you can do outside of this if you're just running around is go hunting, which is incredibly plain and basic, and the forests you go hunting in are lacking a lot of wildlife as well. This game really struggles with side content, and especially post-game content. Like seriously, when you finish this game, you will have hardly anything to do besides the arcade mode and Outpost Master, which get old very fast. To be fair though, Outposts do a much better job of feeling lived in. You will hear guards talking to each other, or even mumbling the words of a song. There's even radios of the Seed family talking that liven up the world. It's a shame this couldn't be more present in the open world itself, because it definitely could use the immersion and life. Now this doesn't really pertain to the open world so much, but I wanted to talk about co-op in this because I know many of you are looking for good co-op open worlds to play with friends. Co-op in Far Cry 5 in general isn't great. When I played this game again recently, I played the whole thing with a friend, and while it definitely helped and made the game feel more exciting, the way Far Cry has always gone about its co-op structure is all wrong. I think it's great that you can play the whole story in co-op, but every cutscene and mission revolves only around one player. It's super weird and unrealistic because there are two of you, but once the cutscene starts you become one. Not only that, but this co-op experience heavily favors the host. For example, if you play with someone and you join their lobby, none of the progress you make in that game counts for you. So while you progress your friend's game, you aren't even progressing your own. So if you ever wanted to play solo, you would have no saves from when you played with your friends besides your guns and perks. This also screws you over on a few perks as well, because for some reason only the host can unlock the perk that gives you a fourth weapon, leaving me with only 3 weapons for the entirety of the game. So while co-op can be fun, there are definitely some better options out there like Ghost Recon Wildlands and Breakpoint. Now, I'm sure you can tell just from the video, but Far Cry 5 is a stunning game. Textures are great, and while I think the game may be a little too saturated for my taste, it still looks great. Face textures are also really impressive, and it may not be the best graphics out there right now, but is by far good enough to satisfy anyone. For you PC players, let's talk performance. I was actually really surprised at how well this game runs on PC. For a Ubisoft PC port, it was really impressive, and playing on Ultra at 1440p, I was able to stay well over 80 to 90 frames. I never encountered a single crash during my playthrough, and I never even received a stutter. It was all really smooth, and which was such a nice relief to not have to worry about this after dealing with intense stuttering in Watch Dogs 2. So yeah, overall, Far Cry 5 is very good in both presentation and performance, which is always nice to have in any form of open world game. Just to recap, Far Cry 5 has a mostly dull and underwhelming story that has a few standout villains, the gameplay is fun and smooth but lacks some variety and uniqueness, and the world is gorgeous yet lacks immersion and life that makes it feel like you're actually in the game. So, should you buy Far Cry 5 in 2020? And I'd say, wait for a sale. To me, the game is neither great nor terrible, it's just okay. Nothing about this game will blow you away, and if you played Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 3, don't be expecting an improved game in Far Cry 5. So if you're interested in this game, I'd say it's definitely worth it if it's on sale for about $20 or less. Anything above that and you may be overpaying a bit, so this game is definitely best if you wait to get it at a cheap price. Like right now on Steam, Xbox and PlayStation, it's $60, so now is definitely not the best time to purchase the game, as I think $60 for this game is very overpriced, especially since it's over 2 years old. Ubisoft games do go on sale quite often. In fact, it was just on sale for $15 a week or two ago, so you won't have to wait too long if you are interested. Anyways, I hope this video helped you in any sort of way, and if it did, please let me know down below in the comments, and comment what game you would like to see next for Should You Buy. I also picked up Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 3, so be expecting Should You Buy for those sometime in the near future. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. And other than that, have a great day, Assassins.